staff report. And in going through the staff report and then the additional reports we got late this afternoon, not necessarily conflicting information, but there's information and ideas and suggestions and recommendations that I think need to come before this council in a work study where we can look at how we are going to address these situations. I am not prepared to vote on purchasing anything because I don't have the information I need. I am in full support of the expertise of our fire chief and the battalion chief and everything coming forward, but there's a boatload of information and implications as to how we go forward offering a service to the people of Hemet and how best to do that and be economically viable through that entire situation. If we are here to authorize looking at financing options and to solicit bids, I would not even want to authorize soliciting bids until we as a council decide, as Carly said, what is our policy going forward? I mean, how are we best going to serve the people with a predominance of medical calls, several higher rise buildings that for the most part house ill and seniors? We've got to cover them. And yet, at the same time, our streets are narrow, they're falling apart. The median down Florida Avenue is going to be the death knell of all of us. And I think we need, as a council, to have some real frank discussion, gathering all this information and talking really frankly about how do we want to do this? Because bottom line, it's going to rest on us whether or not, you know, it's great to have an input, and again, here we go to policy, that this is what a department needs, but by God, the buck stops here, and if we don't have that buck, we're all in trouble. So I think we need that further in-depth conversation.
I think it really warrants a work study.
There's just too much information here to digest and to make, for me, to make a decision tonight, especially because there's 7 more pages.
Well, and some other questions. I mean, if the McSweeney CFD that has been completed covered part of this, what's our plan for the current truck, and what's our obligation, because it was paid for by the people. I mean, everything that we do is, but don't seem to.
There's a lot we have to look at.
If I could add a couple items to the recommended action is the item that's in the staff report. So the staff report is the action that the staff is asking for. But with that being said, in January, I think I've told everybody we've been working on a financial model. We've been talking about kicking off our budget for fiscal year 2021, and so you're going to get information in January about the status of Measure U, the fund balance that we anticipated accruing over the course of the next 7 years. We're going to talk about the general fund balance and the balance in that area. And so I think it makes sense to continue exploring it. I think it makes sense to have information to the council with respect to what that Measure U fund balance is going to look like, given the future expenditures with respect to the radio communication system, some of the additional items that we've talked about too. And then also too, I think there's been a desire to really look at Measure U and the types of activities, the policy level discussions about what are we trying, or what are the outcomes that we want as it relates to Measure U, and what's the input of the council on that. So I think I heard it loud and clear, work study, and more information related to this item.
Mr. City Manager, if I may make just one quick comment. I fully support that approach, and I think that would be an opportunity to bring in the additional stakeholders that also have part of this. I would like, just for the record, to be very clear that the truck staffing the truck issue was clearly identified in our 10-year Measure U plan. And that plan has evolved as the fiscal realities become available. And that's very, very important. Number one. Number two, 2015, Truck 1 responded to 172 calls, 16, 161. In 2017, 211 calls for service. But the truck is an important strategic situation. And again, I'm committed to three things: firefighter safety, operational readiness, and most importantly, fiscal sustainability, because none of this means anything if we can't sustain the improvements that we've committed to. And I think I stand behind that. I think I reflect what this council has made clear to me as your fire chief, and we'll continue to seek out those efficiencies operationally and otherwise that are important towards realizing that goal. But certainly we'll acquiesce to the need for that study, and I would look forward to that ability to be able to share with you in detail the additional information. Finally, the two studies, and thank you, Councilmember Wright, for bringing that up. Those two studies, this council was presented and approved, and those studies have been the basis for many of the changes that we've initiated. So that's important to understand that those are strategic, those are long-term, and professional analysis outside my team that provide you that third-party validation. And I think that's important to realize. They are continuing to be the bedrock of our moving our fire department forward. We have many things we need to get accomplished, and this is an important part of that. But thank you for the discussion.
Michael, you have a question?
I do have before we take any action or you leave, I want to ask the truck that we have, and I know that it hasn't gotten a whole lot of calls for service every year, but it's an insurance policy. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And I agree that it's a much needed tool on the tool belt, if you will. But let me ask you this. I know that with the rear, if the tiller part, it needs a driver back there. Does that truck have to have a passenger to get from the station to a call? And I ask that because would it be possible that if we come up here with a policy that says, hey, we would like to see wherever that truck, and Chief, I've had this conversation with you before about that truck. Personally, I don't care what stations it's at. Put it at the station where it's going to be most efficient for the calls that the city receives, that it's going to get to where it needs to be efficiently, and to be able to be utilized properly. But my question is, if we were to authorize another 2 people for a squad, that could then have a squad could then cross-staff the truck, and that truck is then utilized as an auxiliary to an engine company. And I think you mentioned this up there, that it's a unit that is brought in to complement an engine company of 3. So now you've got 5 people and two apparatus to be able to fight the fire and complement each other with that, if that would be something that would be beneficial. And if we could then, authorize another squad to be able to cross-staff a squad and that truck.
82.5%. 82.5% of our challenge is EMS. 82%. So I'm doing my very best on your behalf to take the resources fiscally and otherwise that I'm given and design a system that meets not only the fire piece, even though it's a small percentage, it's still an issue we need to be prepared for. And number 2, making sure we're meeting our EMS mission task. And number 3, that we can afford it. I'm not going to present anything to this council that puts the city in jeopardy. I think the concept you talk about, certainly my goal, my discussion with our team was that certainly looking at, for instance, our peak demand, staffing for when we have the demand, not staffing for what might happen. That's the innovation I think this community is demanded. And I think we've had these discussions that we need to look out of the box, and we need We need to look at that. One of the tasks that you gave me was to take this department, and status quo is no go. And that means look at every piece of the operation and not be afraid to look at things a little bit different. So that's what we're doing. And I think that within the constraints of our budget reality, that makes that an even bigger challenge. But I'm committed to that. I just want you to hear where I'm coming from, that 82% of our challenge is EMS, and it's not fire. And, you know, we need to be, I just crafted a letter to the state Cal Chiefs regarding local control and the importance of being able to embrace the very concepts we're trying to institute here. Automatic aid, boundary drops, neighbor helping neighbor, to really help us with those gaps. That's what we need to be discussing. And that's why I feel so passionate about this. But I look forward to that opportunity to sit down and have that discussion in that setting, to talk about operational policy and decisions that drive how we run our fire department every day. Glad to do it.
Well, thank you, Chief. Just a couple comments, if I might. I think that my colleagues on the council have brought up some salient points, but I certainly want to appreciate the time that the apparatus committee put into it, and that you and Greg have put into analyzing that information and looking at options, because we need that information. And so it's going to be a critical cornerstone for any subsequent study session that we get into, because we now have a better foundation of understanding. And I think we all want the same end game, and that's to provide the highest level of service that we can possibly afford based on what we know and what we understand about our community, its needs, and our resources. So I think what this has done is it's allowed us to explore what's out there, because technology always changes. And I certainly appreciate the educational moment that we got about the difference between a fire truck and a fire engine. And I know Chief Webb and Captain Poose would also recognize that there's always an education in law enforcement, because a burglary is not a robbery. So those terms are not synonymous. So we continue to educate ourselves in the process as we go. So I'm certainly open to scheduling a study session. I think it would be beneficial in the long run. Does it mean a potential delay in the action? Certainly. But I think it'll present an opportunity for us to make the best, most informed decision.
Mayor, if I make one final comment, critical is timing and sequence. Let's say even if we executed it tonight, I think Greg had shared earlier, it's 1 year out before we see the apparatus. Costs are rising, and so I would ask for your support in at least understanding the criticality of the need, and that we move accordingly.